Hello again. My name is Isaac Olson, and I'm a support escalation engineer for Microsoft Dynamics GP. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some SmartList Designer hacks for the SQL-minded people out there like myself. This is all part of the blog series that we're doing right now with Microsoft Dynamics GP. Are you on top? I'm going to jump right in here and get straight to SQL. As you can see here, I just have a quick template for creating a Sql view. On the top, I'm creating my view. In the middle is where I'm going to insert my SQL select statements. Then on the bottom, I'm going to run a grant select on my Sql view to Dyn group. That way all GP users have access to run that Sql view. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues where only admin accounts like SA can actually execute your SmartList because they don't have access to the view. So I went ahead and I took this and I created a little more elaborate of a select statement. So in here, what we're doing is we're creating a SQL view that would allow you to find the approver and the comments on approved payables transactions that have gone through the workflow. So in here, as you can see, it's fairly elaborate. We're doing a join on workflow tables. We're doing a join on payables tables and on the vendor to grab some of their information. And then we're pulling select certain columns that we want to see rather than pulling all the data or select stars from all of these tables. We also have a where condition on the bottom that helps narrow down how much data we're selecting so that we don't get all this kind of extra nonsense or noise. In this situation, I also created a union so that I can pull my payables open, work, and history. So there's my history, and then here's my work. Creating a select to pull data this elaborate is not something that you would be able to easily do through the user interface in SmartList Designer, and quite frankly, it might not even be possible. So that's where this kind of hack, as I like to call it, comes into play, because at this point I can execute this query. And if I look at my SQL results, it pulls exactly what I wanted to see. I just wanted the vendor, the batch, the document date, and you can notice the document date is formatted nicely. Another trick on your SQL views is to make sure that you format things in SQL the way that you want to see them in the user interface, because you can't format some of these things afterwards once it gets into the SmartList. So like for doc date here, I did a convert varchar and picked my date format to month, day, year. That way it shows up nice and doesn't include like the timestamp and such. And then same with like the doc date and the current transaction amount. Both of those fields, I just wanted to see 2 decimals. That's what my currency setup is in GP, and by default in SQL these would be stored as 5 decimals. So right here I did a convert decimal to 15,2. If you had extremely large transaction amounts, you could go bigger than 15, but that's what I chose for this, just to make it look a little nicer, a little cleaner. And then another trick is run a case when you're talking about document types. Anytime you're pulling like a document type or a certain status or things like that, it's a lot more clean if you run a case in your SQL view, so that you can see down here with my doc type, I happen to have all invoices here, but instead of in the SmartList, instead of seeing just 1, 2, 3 as the document type, I'm running that conversion through a case in my select statements in my SQL view before I bring it over to GP, just to make things a lot more clean, a lot nicer. Another tip would just be, I have a decent amount of columns here. That's probably a little more than what we might need to pull. We can maybe trim this down a little bit, but the more columns that you have in your SQL view, the longer your SmartList is going to take to load, right? Because it has to find all this data, pull it, and push it into the SmartList. So don't run select stars when you're doing your joins on your data. Just select the specific columns that you need or want to see in your SmartList in the end. So in general here, as long as I run my SQL query and I'm pulling the results that I like to see or that I want to see, I've cleaned up and formatted some of the data. I've named my columns. That's another thing, right? So if you do as whatever text you put in here, instead of saying doc date, it's going to be doc_date. Instead of like transaction description showing up as a column name as TRX DSCRN, I want it to display as description. So then you can see down here, my description is the column name instead of TRX DSCRN, and that will flow through into the SmartList also. So that's why it's nice to do all your cleaning up and your formatting directly in SQL on these more complex queries for, kind of reporting before you bring it into your SmartList itself. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute this to create the view. Commands completed successfully. Now if I go to the bottom, you can see I also executed, this was all part of the script, but I granted a select on my view to Dyn Group. This is again to avoid having to run grant SQL on the entire company database, because you're going to want your users to be able to run this view as a select so they can pull SmartList data. So now if I go into Microsoft Dynamics GP and I pull up my SmartList, I can do new, and let's do PM TRX workflow, and I want this under my purchasing folder. And then what I'm going to do is scroll all the way down to the bottom to views. And this is on my company database. So when I click this plus button, it's going to take a little bit to load because it's finding all of your SQL views on that company database. Okay, so it looks like my views have loaded now. So I'm going to look for my PM WF approved transaction. So here's my SQL view. Since I already narrowed down my columns nice, I can just select them all here right away and I don't have to worry about anything. You could select less columns here, but again, it's my recommendation to make your SQL view fine-tuned to exactly what you want, then bring it in here. Now I can run a quick test. Just hit execute query. And if I look down here for my preview on my results, you can see that I pulled data down here, just like I saw in SQL. I changed the doc date format here. I actually left the approval date the way it is. I could have converted that on the SQL side too to make things a little cleaner, but we didn't do that in our select, so that's why it appears that way. And I'm going to hit OK. And voila, I have a SmartList based on a SQL view, and I have it, kind of cleaned up to my own specifications. And now, the users can go into columns, they can go into search and search it just like a regular SmartList. I wouldn't recommend this for reports that are going to be, tens of thousands of records. SmartList in general is designed for around 1,000, which is why we put that as our default down here. But I mean, you can experiment with that. Every system might be a little different with performance and how long it takes to load. but you can see ours is pretty snappy. It loads fast. The more columns that you put side to side, the longer it's going to take to load. So just keep that in mind. I really hope that this helps some of you and maybe inspires some of you who really like the SQL side to create some cool reports and bring them in to have your users be able to see and select the data that they want to see that they maybe otherwise couldn't. This concludes the session for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and please feel free to leave any comments on the blog. We'd love to see your ideas, and hey, if you want to share some SQL views that you create with this too, I'm sure other people would love it.